Don't worry, Dad. I'll handle everything. That's what my son said as he took my passport, my wallet, and my phone from my hands at the airport check-in counter. He smiled in that quick, confident way that made him look like his mother for half a second. Then he turned away, waving the documents like trophies. I remember watching him and his wife Sophie stride toward the business class desk while I stood behind with my single carry-on, the line inching forward. Somewhere in the distance, a choir was singing Christmas carols over the airport loudspeakers. Silent night. It felt ironic. Because just hours later, when I would stand alone under the harsh fluorescent lights of a foreign airport, stranded without a dollar to my name, silence was all I had left. The day had started like any other December morning in Seattle, gray, damp, heavy with the smell of rain. I'd been awake since 5, boiling coffee strong enough to chew, waiting for Evan to pick me up. He was always running late, always full of reasons that made sense only to him. I didn't mind. After 58 years, patience had become second nature. The house was too quiet since Margaret died. I'd gotten used to filling silence with chores, tightening a loose cabinet handle, oiling the hinges on doors that no one used anymore. But that morning, as I stood by the window, watching rain bead on the glass, something about the stillness felt different. Anticipation, maybe. Hope, if I let myself believe it. Evan had called 2 weeks earlier, his voice all bright enthusiasm. "Dad, come with us to Europe. You need this trip. Christmas in Portugal, it'll do you good." He'd said it like he was offering me a miracle, and maybe I'd wanted to believe he was. Since Margaret's funeral, my world had shrunk to grocery runs and empty evenings. The idea of leaving the country, seeing something new, felt like a small rebellion against grief itself. When his car finally pulled up, tires splashing through puddles, Sophie leaned out from the passenger seat, waving. "Merry Christmas, Dad." Her lipstick was a sharp winter red, her smile glossy and thin. I carried my duffel bag to the trunk. Evan was on the phone, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other gesturing with impatience. Yeah, just transfer it," I said now. "Not later," he barked before noticing me. "Hey, Dad." "Ready always," I said. We drove through downtown as the city lights blurred against the wet windshield. Sophie scrolled through her phone. Evan hummed along to the radio, and I sat in the back seat, holding a small envelope in my coat pocket, the printed itinerary, a Christmas card Margaret had written years ago, and $200 in cash I'd tucked away just in case. Old habits. At the airport, the smell of coffee and jet fuel mingled with the hum of hundreds of conversations. Families rushed past with matching suitcases. Couples laughed, kids tugged at parents' coats. It was chaos, but a kind that used to make me feel alive. I handed Evan my passport. "You want me to check in?" I asked. He waved me off. "No, Dad, relax. I'll handle everything. You just sit tight." Sophie touched his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. They laughed. I smiled anyway, even though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was habit. A few minutes later, Evan returned with the boarding passes. "All good. You're in 26B. We'll see you on the plane." I frowned. "Not sitting together, different sections. Long story, Dad. It's fine." He patted my shoulder and walked off before I could ask another question. Sophie lingered for a heartbeat. "You'll love Lisbon," she said. "It's warm this time of year. And after everything you deserve, a little peace." Her words felt almost kind, but her eyes slid away before the sentence finished. The flight was long. I sat between a student reading a travel guide and a retired nurse knitting a scarf. Every now and then, I'd glance down the aisle, half expecting to see Evan or Sophie wave. They never did. When we landed in Lisbon, the air smelled of citrus and sea salt. I followed the signs for baggage claim, my knees stiff from sitting too long. "Dad." Evan's voice echoed from ahead. He waved me over phone pressed to his ear. "We're catching a connecting flight to Milan, quick transfer. You'll follow us." "Okay, Milan," I thought. He cut me off. Just trust me, Dad. Everything's arranged. The next half hour passed in a blur of escalators, boarding gates, and announcements in Portuguese I couldn't understand. Evan moved fast, Sophie right behind him, pulling a designer suitcase. I lagged a few steps, trying not to lose sight of them. At the security checkpoint, Evan handed the agent our passports. Then he turned, smiling too easily. "Dad, wait here. We'll come and get you once we sort out the bags." I nodded, clutching the strap of my duffel. "All right." They walked through the line side by side, their laughter drowned by the noise of the crowd. I watched them disappear beyond the frosted glass barrier. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I checked my watch, shifted from foot to foot. People streamed by. No Evan, no Sophie. Finally, I approached the attendant. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said. "My son and his wife went ahead. They were supposed to come back for me." She frowned, typed something into her computer. "Sir, your ticket shows no connecting flight." "That can't be right, my son." She turned the screen toward me. "I'm sorry, this reservation ends in Lisbon. There's no return flight either." My throat went dry. I reached for my wallet, but my coat pocket was empty. The other side, too. I checked again absurdly, hoping it would appear if I looked hard enough. My wallet, it was with them. My phone, too. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly. "Do you have any contact information?" I stared at the floor, tiled in perfect white squares that blurred together. For the first time in years, I had no answer. Around me, the airport kept moving, voices calling, luggage rolling, children laughing. Life went on indifferent. A young woman nearby glanced at me, smiled politely, then looked away when she saw my empty hands. That look, the one between pity and discomfort, cut deeper than words. I walked to a bench near the arrivals board and sat down. Above me, the loudspeaker announced a flight to Milan, now boarding. I recognized the number. I didn't move. I thought of the last thing Evan said before we left Seattle. "Don't worry, Dad. I'll handle everything." He had. I sat there until the crowd thinned, until the janitor came by, sweeping the floor, humming some soft tune. I pressed my palms together, breathing slow. My head wasn't spinning anymore. The shock had burned off, leaving something colder clarity. In the pocket of my coat, I found the envelope I'd tucked away that morning. The one with the emergency cash and that old Christmas card from Margaret. On the back of the card, written in her neat handwriting, was a phone number. "If you ever need anything, call Laura Bennett." Laura. Margaret's closest friend, a lawyer. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My hand stopped trembling. I took a breath, folded the card carefully, and slipped it back into the envelope. Maybe Evan thought I was too old to fight back, too soft to matter. Maybe Sophie believed leaving me stranded in a foreign country would teach me helplessness. But as I looked around that vast airport filled with strangers rushing toward their destinations, I realized something else they had given me, the one thing they never meant to freedom. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the exit. The lights above flickered, then steadied. I smiled. It was time to make a call. The house creaked the way old houses do in winter would, sighing against cold air. I poured coffee into the same chipped mug Margaret used to tease me about keeping. "You'll outlive that thing," she'd said once, laughing. Maybe she'd been right. Seattle was gray that morning, soft rain beating on the window panes, and somewhere down the street, a neighbor's radio played a Christmas song I didn't care to recognize. It had been 2 months since the funeral, but the smell of lilies still lingered in the living room. Grief has its own scent, something between dust and memory. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. For 40 years, that seat belonged to her. I still caught myself talking to it sometimes, mostly about nothing: grocery lists, the price of gas, weather reports. Old habits die last. I was halfway through my second cup, when I heard tires crunch on the wet driveway. Evan's car. He came in with the kind of energy people wear like armor. "Dad," he called out, arms wide. "You look good." Sophie followed, perfume-sharp smile rehearsed. She placed a casserole dish on the counter. "Thought you could use a proper meal," she said. "Appreciate it," I replied. We sat. The silence between us wasn't heavy, just unfamiliar. Evan cleared his throat, leaning forward. "So, I've been thinking," he began. "You've been cooped up in this place too long. It's time to get out for a while. Clear your head. Out where Europe. Portugal, maybe Spain. We found great deals for Christmas week." His words came out smooth like a practiced sales pitch. Sophie reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine. "It's a family trip, Dad. After what you've been through, you deserve it." I looked at them. Both of them. They had that look couples get when they've already decided something for you. "I don't know," I said. "The house? The paperwork?" Evan smiled, the kind of confident smile he used to get away with things as a kid. "We'll handle everything. You just pack a bag." "Your mother would want this for you," Sophie added softly. And there it was, the line that undid me. Margaret's name. I felt it hit the air like a ghost walking through the room. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After they left, I stood by the window, watching their taillights fade into the rain. The streetlights flickered, turning everything a muted gold. Somewhere deep inside, something uneasy stirred, but I brushed it away. Trusting your child is second nature. Doubting him feels like betrayal. That evening, I opened the garage door and pulled the old tarp off my 1969 Ford F-100. The truck had been with us since the year Margaret and I married. She loved the sound of it, the engine's deep growl when it started, the way it smelled faintly of oil and sun-warmed metal. I ran my hand over the hood. Selling it felt wrong, but Evan's voice replayed in my head. "It's a family trip, Dad. We'll all pitch in." I called an old friend, Tom, who collected vintage cars. He stopped by the next day, looked it over, and said, "She's a beauty. I'll give you $2,500 for her." I hesitated. "That's fair," I said finally. When he drove it away, the sound of the engine faded, like a memory being erased. I stood there long after the noise was gone, hands in my pockets, thinking about all the miles Margaret and I had driven in that truck, cross-country trips, grocery runs, arguments that ended in laughter. I told myself the money would go towards something meaningful. A few nights later, Evan and Sophie invited me to dinner at their house. Their home in Bellevue looked like a showroom, white walls, spotless counters, the smell of cinnamon candles hiding the faint tang of stress. Sophie poured wine and filled my plate before I could refuse. So the tickets, Evan began between bites. "I'll book everything online this week. You can transfer your part to my account when you're ready." "My part?" He nodded casual. "Flights went up a bit, but it'll even out." I didn't question it. Pride can make you too polite. The conversation drifted to business. Sophie bragged about a new investment Evan had made, something about renewable tech foreign partners. I didn't follow the jargon. At one point I heard her say, "Once the transfer clears from your dad's side, we'll be fine." "Transfer?" I asked. Evan laughed quickly. "She means the travel funds, Dad. Don't worry." I smiled, but my fork paused halfway to my mouth. A flash of something passed between them, a look I couldn't read. I'd seen it before, though, on project sites. When someone was hiding a mistake, they hoped the boss wouldn't notice. After dinner, I helped Sophie clear the plates. She said, "You really don't have to bring anything for the trip, Mr. Thompson. Evan will take care of everything. That's what he keeps saying." She laughed, that brittle sound that never quite reached her eyes. "He's a good son." "I know," I said quietly. When I got home, I sat on the porch steps, listening to the rain tap on the railing. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant hum of a television somewhere. I thought about the old days, Christmas Eve dinners, Margaret wrapping gifts late into the night, Evan helping her tape the corners neatly. That boy had her patience once. Somewhere along the way, he traded it for ambition. The next morning, I opened my closet and pulled out the suitcase we used for our honeymoon. Inside were old postcards, a wrinkled photo of Margaret at the beach, and a scarf that still smelled faintly of her perfume. I packed it first. Then I added a book I hadn't finished, a pair of gloves, and the envelope of cash from selling the truck. By afternoon, Evan texted, "Got your flight." "Don't worry, Dad. I'll handle everything." I replied with a thumbs-up emoji, something I'd learned to use recently. He didn't answer. The week passed in a blur of chores and small talk with neighbors who still offered condolences. "Good for you," Mrs. Graham said when she heard I was traveling. "Family time is the best time." "Yeah," I lied. On the morning of our departure, I stood in the doorway, suitcase beside me, staring at the house. It looked smaller, somehow, emptier. I turned off the lights one by one, locked the door, and slid the spare key under the mat. Evan's car honked from the driveway. "Come on, Dad, we'll miss the flight." He was wearing sunglasses despite the clouds, Sophie in a white coat scrolling on her phone. I climbed in the back seat. "Everything packed?" he asked. "Everything that matters." As we drove toward the airport, I noticed an envelope on the dashboard labeled ET Innovations, Loan Documents. I pointed to it. "What's that?" Evan glanced quickly, then shrugged. "Just business paperwork. You know me, always working." Sophie changed the subject. "Wait till you see Lisbon, Mr. Thompson. It's stunning this time of year." I nodded, looking out the window. The city rolled past in streaks of gray and green. Something in my chest tightened, a quiet warning I didn't yet understand. But I told myself not to overthink it. They were my family. Families take care of their own. When we reached the terminal, Evan handed me a coffee and started loading the bags. "I've already checked us in online," he said. "You just follow us through security." I watched him and Sophie walk ahead, hand in hand, laughing about something I couldn't hear. For a moment I saw Margaret in his face again. The tilt of his smile, the dimples she used to kiss when he was a child. I smiled back at the memory, not realizing that somewhere between that moment and the next, I had ignored every sign life had tried to show me. The neighbor's words from earlier echoed faintly in my mind as I watched the automatic doors slide open and the crowd swallow us whole. Family time is the best time. If only that were still true. Christmas morning broke with the kind of quiet that only happens before something goes wrong. The street was slick with rain when Evan's car pulled up. He honked twice, impatient, as if I were a child making him late for school. I stepped outside, suitcase in hand, the cold biting through my gloves. "Merry Christmas," I said as I climbed into the back seat. Neither of them answered. Sophie was scrolling through her phone nails, tapping the screen. Evan had the Bluetooth earpiece and voice clipped and businesslike. "Just finished the transfer," he said, into the mic. "I told you it has to clear before New Year's." He caught my eyes in the rearview mirror, forced a grin. "Morning, Dad. Ready for an adventure, as ready as I'll ever be," I said. He nodded, turning back to the road, his jaw tight. Sophie nudged him. "Maybe don't do calls on Christmas Day," she muttered. He didn't respond. The airport looked like chaos, dressed in tinsel families lugging bags, children waving candy canes, people laughing into phones. Evan moved fast, cutting through the crowd, like he had somewhere more important to be than with us. "Let me handle check-in," he said. "It's faster. I can manage," I replied. He sighed, exasperated. "Dad, please, I booked everything together. Don't mess up the line." I handed him my passport and ticket, trying not to feel small. Sophie smiled thin and rehearsed. "It's better this way, Mr. Thompson. He's good at this stuff." I stood behind them as they reached the counter. The airline attendant scanned their documents, typing quickly. I caught the words "Milan connection" on the screen. "We're stopping in Milan," I asked. Evan turned slightly, his smile tight. "Just a layover. You'll see why later." I wanted to ask more, but the line behind us groaned. Sophie turned, whispering something to Evan that made him smirk. I looked down at the tile floor polished to a mirror and saw my reflection, old, out of place, holding a suitcase too light for the weight in my chest. Security lines stretched like snakes across the terminal. Evan kept our passports in his jacket pocket. "I'll keep them together," he said when I reached for mine. "Less hassle." I nodded. "Habit again. Trust comes easier than doubt when it's your own blood." At the gate, I noticed Sophie's name on the boarding pass she was holding, business class, printed in bold letters. "You two got upgrades?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," Evan said quickly. "Company perk. We'll meet you when you land." "Oh," I tried to smile. I didn't realize we were on different flights. "We're on the same plane, Dad," Sophie said with a laugh too bright. "Just different seats. Don't make it a thing." I didn't. Once on board, I found my seat 26B, middle row. The man beside me was dozing already, and across the aisle a little girl pressed her face to the window, whispering, "Snow Daddy, look." I envied her awe. It had been years since I looked at anything like that, with wonder instead of worry. Halfway through the flight, I got up to stretch. Peering toward the front, I saw Evan and Sophie reclined behind the curtain glasses of champagne in hand. He was laughing. She leaned close, whispering something in his ear. The sound of their laughter hit me harder than it should have. I turned back, pretending not to see. When the plane landed, Lisbon shimmered under soft winter sun. Warm air rolled through the jet bridge, carrying the scent of citrus and coffee. For a moment, I felt lighter. Maybe this was what Margaret would have wanted, a change of scenery, a fresh start. Evan was already a headphone in hand. "We've got a connection in 2 hours," he said. "Stay close." "Milan, right?" I asked. "Yeah." He didn't look up. At baggage claim, I noticed Sophie's luggage had a red priority tag. Mine didn't. When I mentioned it, she waved a manicured hand. "Don't worry about that, Mr. Thompson. We'll handle everything." The same phrase again. "Don't worry." It followed me like a curse. We rode the escalator to the upper level. Evan spoke in low tones to Sophie, the words funds, documents, wire slipping through the noise of travelers. When I asked what he was talking about, he smiled. "Just business, Dad. Relax, relax." We stopped near a cafe. Sophie gestured to a table. "Why don't you sit, Mr. Thompson? Evan and I just need to check something with the airline. We'll be back in a minute." I sat, ordered a black coffee, and watched them disappear into the crowd. My reflection stared back from the window. Tired eyes, gray stubble, a man trying too hard not to look lost. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The coffee had gone cold. I stood scanning the crowd. No sign of them. Finally, I spotted them at a counter near security, handing over passports. I waved. Sophie looked right at me and turned away. I walked closer, but a wall of travelers cut me off. I caught fragments of their voices, Sophie saying, "It's better this way," Evan replying, "He'll figure it out." My stomach turned cold. "Sir," a security guard said as I lingered near the line, "you can't stand here. My family's right there. They've already gone through." I looked toward the tunnel leading to the gates, but it was too late. The last I saw was Evan adjusting his sunglasses, Sophie glancing over her shoulder. For a second, our eyes met. She mouthed something I couldn't hear, but I knew the shape of the words. "Don't worry." I stood frozen as they vanished into the bright corridor. A flight to Milan flashed final call on the board above me. My pulse thudded. I hurried to the check-in desk, fumbling with the folded itinerary from my jacket pocket. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm supposed to be on that flight." "My son?" The attendant looked at her screen. Name please, Thompson. Richard Thompson. She typed, frowned. I'm sorry, sir. There's no ticket under that name. I stared at her. There must be a mistake. She shook her head. Your reservation ends here in Lisbon. I felt the room tilt. No, my son booked everything together. We're traveling to Milan. The woman gave me the kind of look people reserve for someone they don't want to hurt. Sir, I'm very sorry, but you'll need to speak to your family about that. Family. The word suddenly felt heavy, foreign. I moved aside, letting the next passenger step forward. For a long time, I just stood there, clutching the paper that no longer meant anything. Sir, you okay? A stranger asked. Fine, I said automatically, though my voice cracked. He nodded awkwardly and left. I sat down on a nearby bench, the noise of the airport swelling around me. Announcements, laughter, footsteps, everything moving while I stayed still. I tried to convince myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Evan would come back. Maybe he'd call my name from across the terminal, say it was all a mix-up. But somewhere deep in my gut, I knew better. The signs had been there all along, the rushed check-in, the separate seats, the hushed conversations about money. I'd seen them. I'd ignored them. Because that's what fathers do. We see cracks and pretend they're shadows. I reached into my pocket, found the Christmas card Margaret had written years ago. The paper was soft from handling. I traced her handwriting with my thumb, hearing her voice, trust, but verify Richard. She used to say that whenever Evan borrowed money as a teenager. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You were right again, love, I whispered. The intercom announced the Milan flight's departure. I watched through the glass as the plane taxied down the runway lights, blinking against the dusk. My son was on that plane. I was not. A woman with a stroller passed me, humming Silent Night. I realized I was gripping the edge of my seat so tightly, my knuckles had turned white. Slowly, I let go. The world didn't stop. People kept boarding flights, buying souvenirs, living their lives. The betrayal was mine alone. I stood adjusting my jacket, forcing my breath steady. Somewhere inside the chaos, a plan began to form. Not born of rage, but of something colder. Resolve. The last thing I saw before leaving the terminal was a banner above the exit that read, "Trust is earned, not given." I almost laughed. If I'd listened to that sign a few hours earlier, maybe things would have been different. But love, especially a father's love, makes you deaf to warnings. Now, as the sliding doors opened and the warm Lisbon air hit my face, I finally heard everything I'd refused to before. And I knew one thing for certain. This story wasn't over. The terminal clock read 3:47 p.m. when I realized they weren't coming back. For a long time, I just stood there at the security gate, clutching the strap of my duffel like it could hold me up. People kept moving boarding passes, flashing wheels, clattering against tile. Every few seconds, the loudspeaker called for passengers on the flight to Milan. My flight, supposedly. I watched the gate doors close, metal arms folding like jaws. Sir, are you traveling as security agent? Asked polite but firm. My son and daughter-in-law went ahead, I said. They said they'd come back for me. He checked his watch. The flight's closing. You should go. I can't, I whispered. I don't have my ticket. The agent frowned. You'll need to see the help desk. I nodded numb and walked toward the nearest counter. A woman with kind eyes greeted me. How can I help you, sir? There's been a mistake, I said, laying the printed itinerary on the counter. My family and I are flying to Milan. They checked in together. She typed, her expression tightening. May I see your passport? They have it, I said, voice smaller than I meant it to be. They said they'd handle everything. The woman's face softened, pity flickering behind professionalism. I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but your ticket was canceled. There's no reservation under your name for any connecting flight. Canceled, yes, sir. It appears this was a one-way booking from Seattle to Lisbon. I blinked at her, trying to make sense of the words. No, that can't be right. My son said, I'm afraid there's nothing here, sir. Her tone was gentle, final. I felt something inside me shift, a slow cracking that started somewhere behind my ribs. Do you have a phone number for them? She asked. I opened my coat pocket automatically, searching for my phone. Empty. The other side, nothing. My wallet was gone too. For a second, I just stared at my own hands, realizing how absurdly empty they looked. I don't, I said. Do you have anyone you can call? No. The woman hesitated. I can direct you to the information desk if you'd like. They might be able to help. I nodded again, but my legs wouldn't move. She gave a sympathetic smile, the kind that hurts worse than cruelty, and turned to the next passenger. The noise of the airport swelled around me, languages, overlapping laughter, echoing suitcases rolling over tile. Everyone seemed to have a destination. Everyone but me. I found a bench near the glass windows, overlooking the runway, and sat down. The air smelled of coffee and disinfectant. Outside, planes taxied slowly, their lights blinking against the dusk. I pressed my palms together to stop the shaking, but it didn't help. I wasn't angry yet. Anger needs understanding, and all I had was disbelief. A little boy tugged his mother's sleeve as they passed. Mom, why's that man sitting all alone? She shushed him softly, pulling him away. I wanted to vanish into the floor. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Time loses shape when humiliation sets in. I stared at the departures board, watching destinations blur together. Paris, Berlin, Milan. The Milan line disappeared. My chest tightened. Excuse me, I said to a passing attendant. That flight, did it leave already? Yes, sir, she replied. It just departed. I nodded. Thank you. The words felt strange in my mouth, like I'd borrowed someone else's voice. I sat back down. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. A cleaning cart rolled by its wheels, squeaking. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed loudly, carefree. The sound hit like a slap. I took a breath, slow and careful. Don't make a scene, I told myself. You're still you. Margaret's voice floated through memory. Dignity isn't about being respected. Richard, it's about not letting anyone make you small. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I realized I still had one thing, the small inside pocket of my coat, the one Evan never knew about. I reached in and felt the folded envelope I'd tucked there out of habit. Inside were 2 crisp $100 bills, an old Christmas card from Margaret, and a small note card with a name written in her handwriting. Laura Bennett, attorney at law. My throat tightened. I hadn't spoken to Laura in years. She was one of Margaret's oldest friends, the kind of woman who never wasted words. On the day of the funeral, she'd shaken my hand and said, "If you ever need anything, you know how to find me." I guess that day had come. I stood slowly, the stiffness in my knees reminding me I wasn't the man I used to be. I walked toward the information desk, asked for directions to the nearest motel, and stepped outside into the Lisbon evening. The sky was turning indigo streetlights, humming to life. Taxis lined the curb, drivers smoking, talking loudly in Portuguese. The air was warmer than Seattle's salt-tinged alive. I felt none of it. I climbed into a cab, gave the driver the name of a motel I'd spotted from the terminal. He nodded. 15 minutes, he said in broken English. As we drove, the city flickered by colorful houses, Christmas lights strung across narrow streets, people carrying bags of gifts. I pressed my forehead to the window, the glass cool against my skin. Somewhere out there, my son was raising a glass of champagne, celebrating his clean escape. I thought about the word escape. It didn't fit me. I wasn't running, I was starting something. At the motel, the clerk barely looked up. Single room. Yes. He slid a key card across the counter. The room was small but clean, white walls, thin curtains, a bed that creaked when I sat down. I placed the envelope on the nightstand and stared at it like it was a lifeline. For a long time, I didn't move. The shock was gone, replaced by a heavy calm. I replayed every detail: Evan's calls about transfers, Sophie's careful smiles, the way he'd taken my passport without asking. None of it had been accidental. This was planned, calculated. My son had left me behind. The grief that followed wasn't loud. It settled like dust, soft and suffocating. I looked at the cheap clock on the wall. 8:12 p.m. My stomach growled, but I couldn't bring myself to eat. Instead, I opened Margaret's card. The handwriting curved steady and elegant across the page. If you ever lose your way, find someone who remembers who you are. Laura Bennett remembered. I unfolded the motel's notepad, wrote down the number from the card, and dialed from the landline. It rang twice. "Hello, Laura. It's Richard Thompson." A pause. Then a surprised breath. "Richard, it's been... God, it's been years. I know. I'm sorry to call out of the blue. That's all right. Are you okay?" I looked around the small foreign room. "No, but I will be." "What happened? My son left me," I said simply. "At the airport. Took everything. Passport, phone, wallet. And I think he took more than that." The line went quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. "Do you have any proof? Not yet? Then let's get some." "You're not alone, Richard." I swallowed hard, the words catching somewhere deep in my chest. "Thank you. Find a safe place for the night. I'll call you tomorrow morning. We'll figure it out." I hung up, staring at the phone. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. I pulled back the curtain. The city stretched out below, glittering and foreign. Somewhere out there, people were lighting candles, clinking glasses, saying, "Feliz Natal." I stood there for a long time, feeling the distance between what I'd lost and what I still had. Then I turned off the light, lay down and closed my eyes. For the first time since Margaret died, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Because now I had something her death had taken from me, something Evan's betrayal had accidentally returned purpose. The air inside the motel room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, staring at the phone on the nightstand. It was the kind of silence that demanded movement, but I stayed still. My hands were steady now. When I finally picked up the receiver and dialed the number written on Margaret's card, I knew this wasn't a call for comfort. It was the beginning of something else. It rang twice. Laura Bennett speaking. "Laura," I said quietly. "It's Richard Thompson." A beat of surprise. "Richard? I haven't heard that voice in years." "Yeah, I wish it were for better reasons." "What's happened?" I took a breath. My son left me stranded in Lisbon. No money, no passport, no phone. And I think he took something else. From me, not just off me. She didn't interrupt. The sound of paper shuffled on her end. "Tell me everything you can slowly." I told her about the trip, about the tickets, the luggage, how he had insisted on handling everything. I told her what the woman at the airline said: one-way flight, canceled ticket, no return home. I told her how Margaret's name had been used like bait. When I finished, Laura sighed. "That's not a mistake, Richard. That's a setup. How long have you been in Lisbon? 6 hours? Good. That means nothing's finalized yet." "What do you mean? You said Evan's been managing the company, right?" "Thompson Engineering, yes. Since I retired." "Did you ever sign over your shares officially?" "No. Only gave him management rights." "Then there's hope. Listen to me carefully. Don't contact him. Don't tell anyone where you are. I'll start checking the corporate filings first thing in the morning. We'll know by tomorrow what he's done. Laura, thank you, I said. You don't thank me yet, she replied. You just hold on. When I hung up, the adrenaline left my body all at once. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling until the cracks looked like road maps. The room buzzed faintly from the refrigerator. Outside, rain began tapping against the window, slow at first, then steady. I got up, opened my duffel, and pulled out the envelope I'd kept hidden. The cash was still there, $200 bills folded tight. Enough for a few meals, maybe another night or two. I also found a photo of Margaret and me from our 10th anniversary, both of us laughing at something I no longer remembered. She had written on the back, "Keep building even when they tear down." Still giving orders, I murmured. I used the motel's kettle to make instant coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, then sat at the small table near the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. I should have been panicking, but all I felt was focus. Shock had passed. Sadness had passed. What remained was purpose. By morning, the sky had turned a pale gray. I was halfway through another bad cup of coffee when the phone rang. Richard Laura said without greeting, "I've got something." "Already I didn't sleep," she said. I checked the state records. Evan filed new ownership documents for Thompson Engineering 2 days before your flight. They list you as having transferred 40% of your shares to a shell company, ET Innovations LLC. My stomach tightened. Those are my initials. Yes. And the signature on the authorization form, it's yours, or at least someone wanted it to look that way. I gripped the edge of the table. He forged me. That's what it looks like. And Sophie's name appears as managing director of the new entity. If they're moving money, it's probably through that account. So it's true, I said quietly. They didn't just leave me behind. They took everything that had my name on it. Laura's voice softened. I'm sorry, Richard. But you're not powerless. This falls under financial exploitation elder abuse statutes. If we can prove the signature's fake, the law will do the rest. Elder abuse? I repeated the words, tasting bitter. You make me sound frail. Not frail, she said. Just targeted. And you know what that means? That I get to target back. She laughed softly, a short exhale of relief. I was hoping you'd say that. I'll need you to stay put for now. I'm sending an associate to scan the documents from Lisbon. Once we have them notarized, we can file a freeze order. Freeze order, I echoed, feeling the phrase settle in my chest like armor. Yes. It stops them from moving or selling any company assets until the case is reviewed. If they try to touch a cent, we'll know. Do it, I said. Richard, she added, her tone cautious. This will take time. Are you sure you want to go through with it? Once we file, there's no going back. I looked at the photo on the table. Margaret, smiling eyes bright. They chose this path, I said. I'm just following it to the end. Then we start today. After the call, I walked to a nearby cafe. The owner spoke little English, but he poured me coffee and pointed me toward the corner table near a power outlet. I borrowed the motel clerk's laptop later that afternoon, opened an email from Laura. Attached were PDFs, scanned copies of the fraudulent documents, the signature, and a screenshot of the shell company's registration. Even on the grainy screen, I could see it clearly, my name written in shaky imitation. I felt something cold and clean wash over me. Not rage, not sadness, just clarity. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought age made me blind. I wrote back to Laura, file whatever you need. Make sure they can't touch another dollar. An hour later, she replied, underway. Stay invisible for now. Invisible. The word suited me. That night I walked down to the waterfront. Lisbon glittered across the river, its lights rippling on dark water. A street musician played guitar under an awning, the sound drifting soft and low. I dropped a coin in his case and sat nearby. For years I'd built things, bridges, foundations, frameworks. Concrete didn't lie. People did. Somewhere between retirement parties and hospital visits, I'd stopped noticing how easily trust could rot. Margaret had once told me, "Control is respect, Richard. Lose one, you lose the other." I hadn't understood then. Now I did. When I returned to the motel, another message waited from Laura. "My contact at the court clerk's office owes me a favor. We can have the freeze order by Monday." I typed back, "Monday's good. That's when they'll feel it." She responded with a single word. "Exactly." I slept better that night than I had in months. The next day, I went to a small stationery shop nearby and bought a journal. On the first page, I wrote, "Project December." Underneath, I listed 3 goals. Recover what's mine. Expose what they did. Leave behind something better. It looked neat, almost professional, like one of the project logs I used to keep at the firm. But this time, the blueprint wasn't for steel or concrete. It was for justice. By evening, Laura called again. "We've traced a bank transfer," she said. "Sophie moved $280,000 from the company account to a private one in her name, the same day you boarded your flight." I let out a slow breath. They didn't waste time. No. Which means they'll panic once we freeze it. Be ready for contact. What do I do if he calls? Answer. But stay calm. Let him talk. Record everything. I can do that. She paused. "Richard, you sound different." "How so?" "Like a man who's not afraid anymore." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "That's because I'm not." They left me with nothing, Laura. Turns out, nothing's lighter to carry. After we hung up, I turned off the light and sat by the window, the city humming below. I imagined Evan seeing the first alerts on his banking app. Sophie panicking when her card declined. I wasn't cruel enough to wish them suffering. But I hoped for one brief second they'd feel the emptiness they'd given me, standing in some beautiful place, surrounded by everything they thought they wanted, realizing it all meant nothing. I opened my journal again and wrote a final line for the day. Revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with clarity. Then I closed the book and watched the first light of dawn creep through the curtains, painting the room gold. It was the most peaceful I'd felt since Margaret died. The package arrived just after sunrise. A knock on the motel door, 2 short raps, and a courier holding a brown envelope marked with Laura's firm logo. I signed, shut the door, and stood there, staring at it for a moment before opening it. Inside were 3 items: a notarized copy of my old will, a printout of new ownership documents filed by my son, and an email from Sophie to someone named Marquez. The subject line read, "The shares are finally under our control." The room felt smaller. I sat down on the edge of the bed, unfolded the documents one by one. There it was, my signature clean, confident, unmistakably mine. Except it wasn't. I hadn't held a pen like that in years. The line of the R dipped wrong, the angle of the T too stiff. Whoever forged it had studied me closely. Maybe Evan had practiced. Maybe Sophie had helped. I traced the fake signature with my finger, and for the first time since this began, I didn't feel grief. I felt insulted. The phone rang. I picked up. "It's Laura," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "I've gone through everything. It's worse than we thought." "How bad?" "They used a power of attorney authorization dated the day before you flew out. It's stamped with a fake notary seal. According to that, you gave Evan permission to transfer 40% of Thompson Engineering's assets to ET Innovations." "That name again," I muttered. "Yes, and that company is registered under Sophie's name. The money's moving through it, probably to cover debt." Debt. She sighed. I spoke with an accountant friend. Evan's been trading cryptocurrency high-leverage stuff, lost almost $500,000. Looks like he needed capital fast. You were the capital. I pressed the papers flat against my thigh, staring at the fake signature. So it wasn't just betrayal. It was desperation. Desperation doesn't excuse fraud, Laura said. We'll have to act quickly. Once funds are moved overseas, it's harder to trace. Then do it, I said. Freeze it all. I'm preparing the affidavit now. But Richard, are you sure you want to go through this formally? It'll be public record. Your son's name will be out there. Good, I said. He wanted control. Now he'll have attention instead. She was quiet for a moment. I'll need your statement. Everything that happened. Send the form. I'll fill it out. When I hung up, I took another long look at the forgeries. Evan's carelessness stood out now, the wrong date format. The inconsistent ink pressure, even a line where the pen must have hesitated. He'd been nervous, and that nervousness would be his undoing. I spent the morning writing everything I could remember on the motel stationery dates, conversations, details about the trip. Writing steadied me. Every line felt like a nail sealing the lid on something rotten. By afternoon, Laura called again. We have a forensics contact who can authenticate the signature discrepancy, she said. He'll email you forms to sign digitally. We'll notarize remotely. Once we file the freeze order, all Thompson Engineering accounts and related subsidiaries are locked until the court reviews them. Then they can't touch a cent, I said, not legally. But they'll try. Be prepared. I laughed softly. They underestimated me once. That was enough. When we hung up, I walked out into the Lisbon streets. The sky had gone pale blue, streaked with white clouds. I stopped at a cafe near the harbor, ordered coffee, and sat watching ships move in and out of the port. Everyone here seemed to have a destination. For the first time, I did too. The waiter placed the cup down. I thanked him and opened my notebook. On the next page under Project December, I wrote, "Proof secured. Next, patience." I spent hours there rereading the forged papers until I knew every flaw. Each imperfection was a reminder that even betrayal leaves fingerprints. That night, Laura called again. "We've got the motion drafted," she said. "Tomorrow morning I'll file for an emergency freeze. Do you have to tell him no? The bank will notify them after it's done." "Perfect." There was a pause. "Richard," she said softly. "This isn't just about the money, is it?" I stared at the rain-streaked window. "No. It's about my name. He used it to steal. I'm taking it back. You sound calm." "Calm people build better foundations," I said. She chuckled under her breath. "You always did talk like an engineer." I smiled. Blueprints don't lie. After the call, I sat in the dark, listening to the hum of traffic outside. The fear I'd felt on the first night was gone. What remained was clarity, the same steady focus I used to feel standing on a job site before pouring concrete when everything depended on alignment and timing. The next day, Laura messaged early filed. Accounts frozen at 9:02 a.m. PST. I imagined Evan checking his phone confused, calling the bank, realizing nothing worked. It wasn't joy I felt, it was balance. Later, Laura called with more details. "They used your retirement fund as collateral," she said. "But since the transfer was unauthorized, it's invalid now. You'll get it back once the court finalizes." "They really did think I was finished," I said. "They did. But they don't know me," she replied. "And they forgot who you are." That night, as I reviewed the digital copies on the motel laptop, I thought about Evan's voice as a boy, eager, proud, full of promise. Somewhere along the way, that voice had turned into the one I heard at the airport, cold, efficient, careless. He had learned the language of profit and forgotten the sound of respect. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window. Below, the city glowed in orange and gold. Somewhere across the ocean, my son was feeling the ground give way under him for the first time. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Laura Miller traced the document upload to Sophie's laptop. "We have the IP log. It's airtight." I typed back, "Keep everything secure. They'll try to delete or spin it." She replied, "Already backed up to cloud storage and physical copies." "Sleep easy tonight." I couldn't help but smile. "Sleep easy," I repeated aloud. It had been years since anyone said that to me and meant it. The following morning, Laura's tone had changed, brighter, confident. "We're on solid ground, Richard. I'll handle the court filings from here. I'll also need your authorization to revise your will when this is over." "My will, yes. If anything happens, your assets need to be directed properly. You can remove them as beneficiaries." "Remove," I repeated. The word rolled off my tongue, slow and deliberate. "Yes, we'll do that. But not yet. I want them to feel the silence first." Laura laughed softly. "You really have changed." "Not changed," I said. "I've remembered who I was before I became someone's father." After the call, I left the motel, walking through the cobbled streets toward the river. The air was bright and salty. Children chased pigeons near the plaza, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. A vendor called out selling roasted chestnuts. For a brief moment I envied them their innocence, their certainty that the world was fair. Then I remembered that fairness is something men like me build, not something we're given. I stopped at a bench overlooking the water and wrote in my notebook, "Justice is a structure. Build it right and it stands longer than resentment." I closed the book, leaned back, and watched a cargo ship glide out of the harbor. Its hull cut through the water, clean and slow, steady, as a man who knows where he's headed. When the sun dipped, I returned to the motel, ordered a small dinner, and read through Laura's latest update, freeze order approved. Case file sealed under Thompson VET Innovations. You'll be notified when the hearing date is set. I wrote back, "Good. Don't rush it. Let them wonder." Before bed, I stood by the window again, staring at my reflection. For the first time in years, the man looking back didn't seem lost. He seemed measured, capable, whole. "They left me behind," I said to the glass. "They thought I'd fade." Outside, a church bell chimed 9 times. I smiled faintly. They were wrong. The rain had stopped some time before dawn. A pale light crept through the blinds, softening the edges of the small motel room. I sat up slowly, listening to the sound of traffic, beyond the thin walls, the murmur of a city that was already awake. On the nightstand lay my notebook, open to the last line I'd written before falling asleep. "Justice is a structure. Build it right and it stands longer than resentment." I ran a thumb along the words, then closed the cover. It had been 3 days since the freeze order. No calls from Evan. No frantic emails. Just silence, a silence that stretched wide and deep, heavy with meaning. Somewhere out there, my son was beginning to understand that money and control weren't the same thing. Somewhere he was realizing that the man he'd underestimated still had a spine. I shaved, dressed in the same gray jacket I'd worn for years, and walked to the cafe across the street. The barista recognized me now, an older man with kind eyes who didn't speak much English but always greeted me with a nod and a quiet "Bom dia." I sat by the window with my coffee, watching locals hurry past umbrellas tucked under their arms. Every morning since that day at the airport, I'd followed the same ritual: 1 coffee, 1 page. In the journal, 1 call from Laura. Routine steadied me. It gave order to chaos. Today's call came right on time. "I thought I'd catch you before your second cup," she said, her voice brisk but warm. "You're learning my habits," I replied. "Occupational hazard." "How are you holding up?" "Steady." "Good. I have news." I leaned forward, pen in hand. "Go on." Bank confirmed all accounts remain frozen. The investigation is proceeding. Evan's legal team contacted us yesterday. He's looking for a settlement. I let out a quiet breath. Already he's spooked. Probably trying to protect what's left of his reputation. What did you tell them? That my client isn't interested in silence money. I smiled faintly. Good answer. Richard, she said after a pause, you're handling this better than most. I've seen people crumble over less. I spent 40 years in construction, I said. You learn to build through noise. Laura laughed softly. Then I suppose this is just another project for you. Exactly. Except this time I'm the architect and the demolition crew. We hung up soon after. I stayed at the cafe a little longer, sipping the last of my coffee while Lisbon came alive outside. Later that day, I took a walk through the Alfama district. Narrow streets wound uphill between old stone buildings, painted in faded blues and yellows. The air smelled of salt and baking bread. I climbed until I reached a small overlook where the Tagus River glittered below. For a long while, I just stood there breathing, feeling the sunlight on my face. Margaret would have loved this place. She had always wanted to travel to see Europe, to paint the colors she only knew from books. When we retire, she used to say, we'll finally go. But we never did. Work Bill's life, they all found ways to postpone joy. And now, here I was, standing in the very place she'd dreamed of, alone but unbroken. I sat on a low wall and opened my notebook. The page stayed blank for a while. Then slowly words began to appear. They took my name, my trust, my place in their future. But they can't touch who I am when I stop trying to belong to them. A woman nearby was sketching in a small pad. She glanced at me, smiled, then returned to her drawing. I wondered if she was capturing the same light. I saw the kind that makes the world seem forgivable for a moment. When my phone buzzed, I expected Laura again. Instead, it was an unfamiliar number from the U.S. I hesitated, then answered. Dad. It was Evan. His voice was tight, controlled, the kind of tone people use when they're trying to sound calm while the ground shifts under them. I was wondering when you'd call, I said. What did you do? I didn't do anything the law couldn't support. You froze my accounts, No. I cut him off, my voice even. The court froze your accounts. I just stopped pretending not to see what you were doing. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing the faint echo of some expensive room on his end. Dad, you don't understand. I was fixing things. The company needed liquidity. It was just paperwork. Paperwork signed with my name, I said. My forged name. You're overreacting. I was protecting our legacy. Our legacy, I repeated quietly. You turned it into collateral. He groaned. God, you make everything dramatic. Sophie and I. Don't speak to me about her, I said. My voice came out low, sharper than I meant. The silence that followed told me he heard the edge. He started again, softer this time. Look, Dad, I know it looks bad, but you don't want this to get public. It'll ruin the Thompson name. Let's fix it quietly. I'll bring you home. We'll talk. Family to family. I smiled without meaning to. You already left me at the gate, Evan. Family doesn't need a second chance to act like family. He said my name, Dad, like it still had weight. But it didn't, not anymore. I'm hanging up now, I told him. Laura will handle anything else. Laura, he snapped. You called her Jesus, Dad. She's ruthless. So am I said, and ended the call. I sat there for a long time afterward, letting the words settle. The anger that used to burn hot had cooled to something precise, like a laser line cutting through steel. By the time I returned to the motel, Laura had already texted. Evan called me. He's nervous. Don't engage further. We'll let him talk himself into a corner, I replied. He already started. That evening, I went to a laundromat across the street. The hum of machines filled the silence, a steady rhythm that reminded me of the factory floors I'd worked in decades ago. I watched my clothes tumble, colors blurring together, and thought about how life did the same thing, spinning chaos until you learned to find rhythm in it. A man sat 2 seats away, flipping through a Portuguese newspaper. He looked over, once nodded politely, then returned to his reading. I envied his simplicity, his ordinary night. When the dryer buzzed, I folded my clothes neatly and headed back. The streets glistened under new rain. Inside the room, I wrote a new entry in the notebook, Phase 2 Silence. Let the weight of their choices find them. Revenge doesn't need noise, it just needs time. I underlined it twice. Before bed, I opened Margaret's photo again. You'd laugh at all this, I said to her image. You'd tell me to let it go. I smiled. But you'd also admit they had it coming. The next morning, Laura called with an update. Evan's lawyer suggested mediation, she said. He's panicking. He offered to reinstate you as shareholder if you lift the freeze. And I told him my client isn't interested in crumbs. Good. Richard, there's another option, she said. If you want to teach them something lasting, we can move your holdings into a charitable trust. They'll never touch it again. I thought about that for a moment. Let's make sure the lesson hurts first. Understood. After the call, I looked out the window at the waking city. The sun rose slow and golden over the rooftops, washing the sky in color. I felt calm, steadier than I'd felt in years. Some men seek revenge to feel alive. For me, it was simpler. Revenge had reminded me I'd never been dead in the first place. When night came, I wrote one final line before turning off the light. They left me with nothing. But a man with nothing left to lose is the hardest kind to break. Lisbon was quiet in the early morning, the kind of quiet that carried the promise of movement beneath it. I sat by the window of my small motel room, watching the city stir awake. Somewhere below, a delivery truck rumbled over cobblestones, the smell of bread drifting up from a bakery. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line across the top of the page, Project December Execution. Then I drew a box around it. I'd spent the past week waiting, watching, thinking. Evan's last call had confirmed what I already knew he was unraveling. Guilt has a sound when you know how to listen for it. Now it was time to stop listening and start acting. Laura's message came just as the clock struck 7. Ready when you are. I called her immediately. Let's move, I said. Her tone was clipped efficient. All right. You'll send the email first. Keep it calm, polite, make it sound like you're backing down. I can do polite, I said. Include the line we discussed, the one about the transfer. Got it. And remember the link Miller embedded will track whoever opens it. Once they do, we'll have confirmation of their IP and device location. Perfect. I hung up, opened the laptop, and began typing. Subject, no hard feelings, Evan. I've had time to think, and maybe I overreacted. You and Sophie are smart people. You'll handle things your way. I hope the transfer went smoothly. Margaret would be proud of what you've built. Dad? I read it twice. It sounded harmless enough, the kind of message a defeated man might send after realizing resistance was pointless. I clicked send. 20 minutes later, Laura called. They opened it, she said, excitement crackling through her calm. From their home network in Seattle. I've got their digital fingerprint. Good, I said. Now we wait. We didn't wait long. 2 hours later, an email arrived from Sophie's account. Good to know you're safe, Richard. We'll settle the rest after the holidays. Take care of yourself. I forwarded it to Laura. Her reply came almost instantly. She just admitted to holding assets on your behalf. That's enough for our petition. I smiled. Hook, line, and sinker. The next phase required patience and precision. Two things I'd spent a lifetime mastering. Laura and her tech specialist Miller assembled everything: the forged signatures, the bank transfers, the IP evidence. Then she submitted the file to the Superior Court of Washington under an emergency request for financial injunction. 3 days later, my phone rang before sunrise. "It's done," Laura said. The judge signed the freeze order. Every account connected to ET Innovations and Thompson Engineering is locked pending investigation. I exhaled slowly. How long until they find out? Within the hour. The banks have to notify them. I poured myself coffee dark and strong and walked to the window. Lisbon glowed under pale light, the Tagus River glimmering like molten glass. For the first time in months, my reflection didn't look like a man drowning. It looked like a man surfacing. By noon, the silence broke. The phone buzzed with a number I recognized. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. "Dad, what the hell did you do?" Evan's voice was frantic. "Good afternoon, son," I said evenly. "Enjoying your vacation? You froze my accounts, our accounts. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I didn't do anything," I said. "The court did. I just told them the truth. You think this is justice? You're ruining everything we've built?" "You built this?" I asked quietly, "with forged documents and stolen signatures." "Stop dramatizing," he snapped. "You could have come to me. We could have talked." "I tried talking," I said. "You left me standing at an airport in a foreign country." There was silence on the other end, then a choked sound. "Dad, it wasn't supposed to go like that. Sophie, don't blame Sophie. She only followed your lead. That's what you wanted, isn't it? Someone who listens, someone easy to control." He breathed heavily, a mix of panic and anger. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you," I said. "Not anymore." "Dad, listen. I've done enough listening." I kept my tone calm, measured. "Do yourself a favor, Evan. Call your lawyer." I hung up. The phone buzzed again moments later, Sophie's number this time. I didn't answer. Let her stew in the silence she'd given me at the airport. I sat back sipping my coffee. Outside church bells tolled across the hills, long and low. Lisbon went on living oblivious to the small war being won from a motel room. By evening, Laura confirmed what I already suspected. They've contacted the bank multiple times. Every account is locked. Their corporate card was declined this afternoon. And there's more. Evans board members have requested an emergency meeting to address financial irregularities. They'll eat him alive, I said quietly. He deserves it. Yes, I said. But I don't need to watch. She hesitated. You're taking this better than most. I'm not celebrating, Laura. I'm just finished. She said softly, That's not what this feels like. This feels like the calm before another move. I smiled to myself. Maybe. Later that night, I sat at the small table by the window and wrote a letter. Margaret, you always told me not to fight fire with fire. I didn't. I used light. You'd be glad to know the name you carried is clean again. The boy we raised lost his way, but not everything you built with me is gone. Some of it still stands in me. Merry Christmas, love. Richard. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in an envelope, and wrote, To Margaret, Christmas Eve, across the front. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I poured the last of the coffee into my cup, took a slow sip, and looked out the window. Rain had started again, faint and misty, brushing against the glass. My phone vibrated once more. This time a text from Laura News broke. Local papers covering the investigation. Evan and Sophie are trending on business forums. I typed back, let it run its course. I'm done chasing anything that doesn't matter. Then I turned off the phone, set it face down, and leaned back in my chair. Revenge. I realized didn't need fireworks. It didn't need shouting or blood or spectacle. It just needed silence and patience, the kind of patience that comes from age, from loss, from knowing exactly what something is worth and what it isn't. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance. I raised my cup toward the storm and smiled. They left me stranded, I said aloud, my voice steady, almost amused. Now they know how it feels. Somewhere across the ocean, I imagined Evan pacing in a darkened room, Sophie crying quietly, the world they built on deceit collapsing one frozen account at a time. I didn't wish them pain. I only wished them understanding. As the rain thickened, I closed my notebook, turned off the lamp, and lay back on the bed. The sound of water against the window lulled me into stillness. Tomorrow I'd decide what to do next. But tonight, I let the quiet hold me. Justice didn't roar. It whispered. And I had finally learned to listen. The phone started ringing just after noon. I let it go twice before I answered. "Go ahead, son," I said, my voice calm. "I've been expecting your call." On the other end, there was a short, angry breath. "What did you do, Dadmy?" I leaned back in the chair, watching the rain slide down the motel window. "I did nothing the law couldn't verify." "You froze the company," he snapped. "Do you even understand what that means? Our clients are calling non-stop. The board wants answers. You've destroyed everything." "I destroyed nothing," I said evenly. "I just showed them what you built on lies." "Jesus, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." I reached for the folder beside me, the one Laura had emailed that morning. December 10th. That's when you filed the forged transfer. The signature you used wasn't mine, Evan. Not even close. There was silence on the line, thick and long. I imagined him sitting behind his expensive desk, his hands clenching, his mouth opening and closing, with nothing to say. "Who told you that?" he finally asked. "The court records did," I said. "And the forensic report Laura submitted this morning confirms it. You used my name, my handwriting, my reputation. That's theft." "It was a mistake." "No." I cut him off, my voice low. "A mistake is forgetting to sign your name. What you did was a choice." On the other end, I heard him exhale shakily. "You don't understand. I had to do something. The company was bleeding, Dad. The contracts dried up, the investors wanted out. Sophie said, 'Don't you dare blame her,' I said. 'This started with you. I gave you control because I believed you'd protect what we built. Instead, you gambled it away.' I was trying to save us," he shouted. "You walked away, remember? You left me holding the mess." I smiled faintly. "I retired, Evan. I didn't disappear. You were supposed to keep building, not burn it down." He went quiet again, breathing heavy through his nose. Then his tone changed, softer, coaxing. "Look, Dad, we can fix this. Let's just talk. Drop the charges. We'll transfer everything back. I'll make it right." "Make it right," I repeated. "How?" "By pretending it didn't happen, by buying my silence. I'll give you whatever you want." "What I want," I said slowly, "is for you to look at what you've become." He didn't answer. The only sound was static and his uneven breathing. "You always said you wanted to be your own man," I continued. "I guess you finally did it. You just forgot what kind of man you were supposed to be." "Stop lecturing me." He snapped, his anger returning like a switch flipping. "You think this makes you noble, freezing my accounts, embarrassing me in front of the board?" "You're just bitter." "Maybe," I said. "But at least I'm not a thief." He laughed, then a harsh, broken sound. "You think this is justice? It's cruelty. You want to watch me fall?" "No," I said quietly. "I want to watch you learn." The line went silent again. "Dad?" His voice cracked on the word. "Please, I've got 2 kids, a house, bills." "You can't just—" "I already did," I said. "The law did the rest." He cursed under his breath. You've always loved control more than you loved me. No, son, I said. I just never mistook control for love. I could almost hear him recoil. He started to say something, then stopped. A second voice came through faintly in the background, Sophie's. Evan, what's happening? The card isn't working. I waited silent until she realized I could hear. You can tell her I said hello, I said. Don't do this, Dad, Evan said quickly. Don't drag her into it. She put herself in it when she signed the documents. That wasn't her idea. Then she should have walked away when you asked her to forge a marriage license for your business. How do you know about that? He demanded. I know everything now. I said simply. That's what happens when you stop lying to yourself. He exhaled, the fight draining out of his voice. You're going to regret this. No, I said and smiled. You are. Then I hung up. The silence that followed was heavy but clean. I closed my eyes, listening to the rain against the window, and for the first time since Margaret died, I felt still. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Laura. Well, she asked. He called, I said. And he begged. Then he blamed me. Then he begged again. Laura chuckled softly. They always do. Did he admit anything enough? You'll have your transcript soon. Perfect, she said. The board meeting's set for tomorrow morning Seattle time. Once the notice is filed, they'll have no choice but to suspend him. Good, I said. Let the consequences do the talking. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading. The rain slowed, turning to a fine mist. Outside Lisbon carried on like nothing had changed, like it hadn't just witnessed the quiet collapse of a family empire. That evening, I turned on the television. The English news channel ran a short segment. In business today, ET Innovations. A Seattle-based technology subsidiary faces allegations of financial misconduct and forgery involving its CEO, Evan Thompson. The court has issued a temporary injunction pending investigation. The words were clinical detached, but the image of Evan standing before reporters, pale and tight-lipped, said everything. I muted the TV. There was no satisfaction, no victory, only a deep quiet. Justice wasn't supposed to feel like joy. It was supposed to feel like balance, and that's what this was. Laura called again that night. It's official, she said. The company's frozen. The board voted to remove him as acting CEO. They're issuing a public statement tomorrow. Then it's done, I said. For now, she replied. But I think you should decide what comes next. I thought about that for a moment. I already have. What's that? I'm going to erase them from everything. Not out of hate, out of clarity. Then I'll prepare the documents for your will, she said. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thank you, Laura. For everything. You don't owe me thanks, Richard. You just owed yourself this moment. After we hung up, I walked down to the riverfront. The streets were slick with light rain. The air smelled of salt and diesel from the ships. I leaned against the railing and watched the reflection of the city tremble on the water's surface. Somewhere far away, a plane lifted off from the airport. I thought of that day, the moment Evan and Sophie walked away from me without looking back. For weeks, I'd replayed it as the scene of my humiliation. Now it felt like the start of my freedom. They had left me with nothing. But nothing turned out to be enough. Enough to rebuild, enough to see clearly, enough to stop mistaking silence for weakness. I took out my phone and opened a new note. I typed, "He took my signature. I took back my legacy." Then I put the phone away and walked back toward the motel, the sound of the rain following me like applause from an invisible crowd. The embassy doors opened with a soft hiss, letting in a breath of cool air that smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. I stepped inside, nodding to the security guard who checked my passport. The new one Laura had arranged through the consulate. The marble floor echoed under my shoes as I walked toward the counter marked legal affairs, document services. A young officer in a Navy suit looked up from her desk. Mr. Thompson, yes. She smiled politely. We've prepared your notarization packet. You can review and sign here. I sat down, removed my glasses, and took the folder she slid across the desk. Inside were the papers Laura had overnighted, revised ownership statements, legal declarations, and the first draft of a new will. I flipped through them slowly, line by line, until I reached the bottom page marked Signature of Executor. For a moment I just stared at the blank line. Then I uncapped the pen, set its tip to paper, and wrote my name, Richard A. Thompson. The letters came out steady, deliberate mine. When I lifted the pen, I realized I'd been holding my breath. The officer looked up. Everything all right, sir? Yes, I said quietly, for the first time in a long while. She stamped the seal and returned the documents. You're all set. I thanked her and stepped back into the Lisbon sunlight. The street outside was busy, vendors selling oranges, taxis honking, the smell of roasted chestnuts curling through the air. I found a bench near the fountain and opened my briefcase again, staring at the papers one more time. The new will wasn't complicated. It didn't name Evan or Sophie anywhere. It directed every asset, my shares, properties, and remaining savings, to a charitable trust Laura had helped me establish, Honor Haven Foundation. The trust's mission was simple: to provide legal aid and housing for older adults who'd been financially exploited by their families. People like me. I read through the preamble Laura had drafted in my name, to honor the principle that dignity is not a privilege but a right, and to ensure that betrayal never silences integrity again. I smiled faintly. It sounded like something Margaret would have written. My phone buzzed. It was Laura. You signed, I did, I said. Congratulations, Richard. It's official now. Everything's been transferred to the Foundation's holding account. Your son and daughter-in-law are legally removed from your estate. I exhaled, slow and steady. Then it's done. Not quite, she said. You still need to decide where you'll go next. The funds are safe, but you can't stay in a motel forever. I know, I said. I'm thinking. Think fast, she teased. You're a free man now. Might as well live like one. Her voice carried a smile. I could hear papers rustling on her end. One more thing, I arranged for a local notary to deliver your foundation certificate this afternoon. After that, everything will be finalized. Thank you, Laura. Really? You don't owe me thanks? Just a postcard when you find peace. I laughed softly. Deal. After the call, I wandered down the narrow streets of the Baisha district, the cobblestones glinting in the afternoon sun. I passed a bookstore, a tailor, a cafe playing old jazz through a cracked speaker. People smiled at each other here. No one knew my name, and somehow that felt like freedom. At a small table outside the cafe, I sat and ordered lunch. Grilled sardines, bread, and a glass of white wine. When the waiter brought it, I raised the glass slightly, a silent toast to no one and to everything at once. To endings, I murmured, and beginnings. After lunch, I walked to a local bank branch Laura had recommended. The manager, a soft-spoken man named Duarte, guided me through the process of closing my temporary account and wiring the remainder into the Foundation's fund. He asked if I wanted to list any family member as a contact. No, I said. Just me. He nodded, typed something on his screen, then smiled. A man who knows his own boundaries. Rare thing. Hard-earned, I replied. Outside, the sky had shifted to a silvery hue. The air felt heavier, like the calm before rain. I tucked the final receipt into my briefcase and started walking back toward the river. On the way, I stopped at a post office. There was one last letter I needed to send. It was addressed to Laura's office. Inside the envelope were two things: a signed copy of my new will, and a smaller note in my handwriting that read, "To be opened only upon my passing." I didn't know why writing those words brought me peace. but it did. Maybe because they meant I'd finally taken control of the story. By the time I reached the riverfront, the wind had picked up. Waves slapped against the stone embankment, sending fine mist into the air. I found a spot beneath an old lamppost and sat down watching the sky turn from gray to gold. I thought about Evan, not the man he'd become, but the boy he once was. The one who used to sit on my shoulders while we built model bridges in the garage. The one who'd run to Margaret first whenever he scraped his knee, because he knew she'd kiss it better. Somewhere between those memories and the man who left me at an airport, something vital had gone missing. I didn't hate him for it. Hate would have meant I still expected more. The wind rustled through the trees, and I heard Margaret's voice in memory. If they ever forget who you are, remind them without shouting. I whispered back, I think I just did. A notification buzzed on my phone. Laura again. Funds cleared. The trust is live. You did it. I typed back, we did it. Then I slipped the phone into my pocket and let the sound of the river fill the silence. When the rain finally started, I didn't move. It was a soft drizzle, more like mist than water. I tilted my head back, letting it touch my face. Somewhere behind the clouds, the sun was setting, breaking through just enough to turn the raindrops into gold. I thought about Margaret again, how she loved sunsets, how she used to say they were proof that endings could still be beautiful. I closed my eyes and smiled. For years I'd believed revenge was about balance, about taking back what someone stole. But sitting there drenched and free, I understood something else. Revenge was never the goal. Justice was. Peace was. And I had both now. When the rain stopped, I stood and walked back toward the motel. On the table, I placed the briefcase with the finalized documents. Everything that once tied me to Evan, Share's account's authority, was gone. The past had been signed away in ink and sealed by choice. I poured myself a small glass of the wine I'd brought back from the cafe, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the folder one last time. Then I said quietly, they stole my name once. Now it seals their fate and my freedom. Outside, thunder rolled far in the distance, fading into silence. I turned off the lights, lay back, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would come like it always did. But tonight, I had finally earned the right to sleep without looking back. 6 months later, the Montana air smelled of pine and rain. The mountains behind the cabin wore streaks of snow like old scars that hadn't quite healed, but the valley below was green alive. I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee steam curling in the cold morning air. Somewhere down the dirt road, a truck engine hummed to life, the sound of my new neighbors heading into town. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to be anywhere. The cabin was small, sturdy, built with my own hands or what was left of them. I'd rented it with the last of my personal savings, fixed the broken window frame, sanded the floors, patched the roof. I'd traded boardrooms and legal documents for wood hammers and nails. It felt good. It felt honest. Most mornings started the same way: coffee, a walk to the ridge, and then a few hours at the workshop in town where I taught basic mechanics to local kids. The sign above the door read, "The Thompson Workshop." Laura's idea, not mine. She said the name might inspire donations. It did. People were generous when they heard what the place stood for: a community space funded by Honor Haven, for anyone willing to learn or rebuild. Caleb, the youngest of the group, waved at me as I walked in that morning. "Morning, Mr. Thompson." "Morning, kid," I said, hanging my jacket on the hook. "You fixed that carburetor yet?" He grinned, grease smudged across his cheek. "Almost. It's stubborn, then be smarter," I told him, and his laugh echoed through the shop. By mid-morning, the place smelled like oil and sawdust. The kids argued over tools, music played softly from an old radio, and I found myself smiling without realizing it. Watching them reminded me that creation was still possible after destruction. During lunch, Caleb sat beside me on the workbench, eating a sandwich. "Mr. Thompson, is it true you used to own a big company?" I looked down at my hands, still stained with oil. "I owned a few mistakes," I said, "but I learned how to build better ones." He didn't understand, but he nodded politely. "You're kind of famous, you know. People in town say you gave all your money to that foundation." "Fame's just a louder kind of misunderstanding," I said. "Don't chase it." He smiled. "You talk weird sometimes." "I'm old," I said. "That's part of the job description." When the afternoon sun slid through the wide windows, dust floating like gold in the air, I thought about Margaret. She would have liked this place, the sound of tools clanging, the smell of cedar, the laughter of young voices learning something useful. She used to say, "Work is prayer in disguise." Maybe this was mine. After the workshop closed, I walked back up the hill toward the cabin. The path wound through tall grass and birch trees, the sound of crickets rising with the dusk. I stopped halfway to catch my breath, leaning on the railing by the overlook. From there I could see the river bending around the valley like a silver thread. That was when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me already knew. I answered anyway. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in half a year. "Dad, Evan." I said nothing at first, just listened to the wind whistling through the trees. "Dad, I got your letter," he said finally. "Laura sent me the notification, the foundation, the will, everything." I could hear traffic behind him, the hum of a city. "So you know it's done," I said. "I know." His voice cracked slightly. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." I laughed softly. "That's what you always thought, son, that I'd bark but never bite." He didn't answer. I imagined him sitting in some small apartment, the walls closing in, realizing that pride doesn't pay bills. "I didn't call to fight," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air like fragile glass. "Sorry for what I asked. For everything," he said. "For the company, for the trip, for Mom's money. For thinking I could outsmart you." The old ache pressed against my chest, but it didn't sting the way it once had. "I don't need your apology, Evan. I needed your honesty when it mattered." "I know," he whispered. "You still with her?" I asked. "Sophie, no. She left when everything fell apart." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "That tends to happen when the ground isn't real." He sighed. I miss you, Dad." "You miss who I used to be," I said. "And I miss who you could have been." We both went quiet. The sound of wind filled the space between us. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said finally. "I just hope you're okay." "I'm better than that," I said. "I'm at peace." He hesitated. "You sound different." "I am," I replied. "When people stop needing your silence, you learn how to hear yourself again." "Would you ever come home?" he asked. "I am home," I said. He didn't speak again. Eventually, the line clicked dead. I stood there, phone still in my hand, until the screen went dark. When I reached the cabin, the sky had turned violet. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the light fade. A small radio on the table played a soft jazz tune. Outside, the river caught the last glimmer of daylight. I opened my journal and wrote, "He finally learned what money can't buy." Then I turned to a fresh page and wrote another line. "The best revenge is peace." 2 days later, Laura called to update me on the foundation's progress. "The first Thompson workshop in Seattle just opened," she said. "They're offering free vocational training for retired workers. It's already full." "That's good," I said, smiling. Margaret would have liked that. I think she'd be proud, Laura said. And so am I. Thank you, Laura, I said softly, for standing by when no one else did. I didn't stand by, she said. You fought Richard. I just handed you the hammer. When the call ended, I stepped outside again. The night was cool, the stars scattered thick across the sky. I walked down the small dirt path to the garden. I'd started months ago, a few rows of vegetables, a patch of wildflowers, a young maple tree planted in the center. I knelt beside the tree and touched the trunk rough and alive. Margaret used to say trees remember kindness. I hoped this one would remember mine. From the porch, the soft glow of the cabin lights made the glass panes shimmer. Inside, the photo of Margaret sat on the mantel, her smile captured mid-laughter. I raised my cup toward it. I did it, I whispered. We're safe. The night didn't answer, but the wind moved through the trees like approval. When I went to bed, the journal still lay open on the table, the last line visible under the lamplight. Peace isn't what you find after revenge. It's what you build from what's left. I closed the cover, turned off the light, and listened to the sound of rain tapping softly on the roof. For the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of loss. A year later, Christmas morning came quietly. The world outside my cabin was white, and still a blanket of snow laid smooth across the valley. I stood at the window with a cup of black coffee, watching the light spill over the ridge. It was the same mountain I'd looked at every day for the past 12 months. Yet it never looked the same twice. Peace, I'd learned, wasn't the absence of change. It was learning to meet it without fear. The cabin had grown into something that felt like home. Books stacked on the table, a worn rug. Margaret would have hated the faint smell of cedar from the firewood. I chopped myself. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, crooked but honest, wrapped with a string of lights the kids from the workshop had brought me last week. They'd decorated it themselves, leaving a note on the counter. To Mr. Thompson, the toughest teacher and the softest heart. I'd laughed when I read it. They weren't wrong. I sat down by the fireplace and opened my old leather journal. The first pages were still filled with the early plans, revenge freeze orders, proof of forgery. I turned further ahead where the ink grew lighter and the handwriting slower. The last entry I'd written read, "He finally learned what money can't buy." I flipped to a blank page and began to write. Revenge taught me two things: how fragile trust can be and how strong dignity must remain. The first can be taken, the second has to be built, one hard choice at a time. The pen scratched softly on paper. Outside, snow kept falling silent, unhurried. I paused, staring into the fire. Sometimes I thought about Evan. Not often, but enough to remind myself that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering without reopening the wound. A few weeks ago, Laura had sent me an update. The foundation was thriving, 3 workshops now open, all fully funded. Evan had written another letter, short, restrained, respectful. He didn't ask for money this time, only said he hoped I was well. I hadn't answered. Some doors are better left closed, even when they lead to blood. The knock on the door startled me. It was rare for anyone to visit unannounced out here. I opened it to find Laura standing in the cold, smiling beneath her scarf, a thermos of coffee in one hand. "You didn't think I'd let you spend Christmas alone, did you?" I laughed. "You drove all the way up here in this weather. Lawyers are stubborn," she said, stepping inside. "Besides, you still owe me a cup of decent coffee." I poured her a mug and motioned toward the fire. "You've got good timing." I was just trying to remember if peace gets lonely. She raised an eyebrow. "And it doesn't," I said, "but it gets quiet." She nodded, warming her hands near the fire. "You've earned quiet, Richard. Not everyone does." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while. The snow outside softened the world into stillness. After a time, she turned to me. "You know the Honor Haven Board wants to name the next center after you." "They shouldn't," I said. "It wasn't about me." "They think it was. It was about the lesson," I said. "That legacy isn't money or property. It's the mark you leave when you finally stop being afraid to do what's right." Laura smiled. "That's why they'll name it after you." We both laughed quietly. Later, as the afternoon light faded, she helped me hang a few more ornaments on the crooked tree. When we finished, she looked at it and said, "It's imperfect." "Like everything worth keeping," I replied. When she left, I stood on the porch watching her car disappear down the road. The world felt wide again. I went back inside, poured myself another cup, and sat down with the journal once more. This time I wrote not to remember, but to speak. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, remember this: blood makes you related, but respect makes you family. Don't let their choices define your worth. The best revenge is peace, and peace comes when you stop chasing apologies that were never meant for you. The fire crackled softly. I set down the pen, leaned back, and listened to the wood popping in the hearth. Later that evening, I stepped outside again. The snow had stopped and the stars were sharp and endless above the valley. The maple tree I'd planted months ago stood in the garden, its bare branches reaching toward the sky. I brushed a thin layer of frost from the plaque at its base for Margaret, builder of the light. "I found it, love," I said quietly. "The peace you told me about." The wind stirred through the branches, and for a second it almost sounded like her laughter. I smiled, turned back toward the house, and left the door slightly open to let the light spill out onto the snow. Inside, the radio played a slow jazz tune. I poured the last of the wine and sat by the fire. The flames reflected in the glass, flickering gold. For a long time, I watched them dance. When the song ended, I opened my notebook one final time and wrote, "Legacy is not what you leave behind, it's what you build while you're still breathing." I spent half a lifetime thinking revenge would fix what was broken. Turns out, forgiveness, quiet, deliberate forgiveness, was the only real justice. I set the pen down and closed the cover. The world outside was still the air full of the faint hum of winter. I looked into the fire and spoke softly as if someone was still listening. They thought I'd fall apart when they left me. They thought I'd beg. But I stood up, I built again, and I lived. The firelight glowed warm against the walls. If this story ever finds someone who's been left behind, I said, I hope it reminds them that standing up isn't pride, it's survival. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? The wind pressed gently against the cabin, almost like an answer. And if you believe I whispered that justice still matters, that kindness isn't weakness, that family means respect, not obligation, then keep listening. Because every time one of us tells the truth out loud, the world gets quieter, steadier, and a little more whole. The fire crackled again. I leaned back, feeling the weight of peace settle around me like an old coat. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and do the same simple things. Brew coffee, teach the kids, fix what was broken. But tonight, I lifted my glass toward the stars and smiled. Because after a lifetime of betrayal, revenge, and silence, I had done something better than winning. I had chosen to live.